There's something most people don't like to admit, not out loud, and not even to themselves, because once you see it, it becomes very hard to ignore. You are not always the person you think you are. Not completely. There's a part of you that wants things you wouldn't be proud to say out loud. A part that gets jealous, that compares, that quietly resents. A part that wants recognition, control, validation, even when you tell yourself you don't. And most of the time you don't notice it, because it doesn't show up directly. It hides behind good intentions. It hides behind logic. It hides behind the version of yourself you've learned to present to the world. But every now and then, in very small moments, it slips through. Like when someone else succeeds and instead of feeling happy for them, something else shows up first. Or when you say something nice, but part of you knows you're doing it to be seen a certain way. Or when you make a decision, and later realize it wasn't as pure as you thought. And the strange part is, you don't fully understand why. Because you've been taught to see yourself as rational, as good, as intentional. But what if that's not the full picture? What if there's something deeper, something more complicated, that's been shaping your behavior this whole time without you fully noticing it? That's exactly the kind of question Fyodor Dostoevsky spent his life exploring. And what he discovered was not comfortable. Dostoevsky wasn't just a writer telling stories. He was someone trying to understand what human beings are really like beneath the surface. Not the version people present, not the version that fits into society, but the raw, conflicted, often contradictory reality underneath. And the reason he saw people this way wasn't theoretical. It came from experience. He was arrested, sentenced to death, forced to stand in front of a firing squad, waiting for the moment his life would end. And then, at the last second, the execution was canceled. After that, he was sent to a prison camp in Siberia. Years of isolation, hard labor, and exposure to people pushed to their psychological limits. That experience changed everything. Because in those conditions people don't behave the way they're supposed to. They don't act like the version of themselves they present in normal life. They reveal something deeper. Dostoevsky saw kindness and cruelty exist in the same person. He saw people suffer, and instead of becoming better, become more bitter. He saw how fragile the idea of being rational really is. And that led him to a question most people avoid. If we can act in ways that contradict everything we believe about ourselves, then how much of who we think we are is actually true? Most people believe they make decisions logically, that they think things through, weigh options, and act based on reason. But if you pay close attention, that's not how it actually works. A decision often feels right first, and only afterward do you come up with a reason for it. You don't choose something because it's logical. You choose it because something in you wants it, and then you explain it in a way that sounds reasonable. Dostoevsky understood this deeply. He saw that human behavior isn't driven purely by logic, but by something much more complex. Desire, fear, ego, pride, and sometimes impulses that don't even make sense. There's a part of you that doesn't necessarily want what's best. It wants what feels satisfying in the moment. It wants to be right, even if it means being wrong. It wants recognition, even if it comes at a cost. And this creates a conflict. Because consciously, you might want one thing, but unconsciously you're pulled in another direction. This is why people sabotage themselves. Not because they don't know better, but because something deeper is influencing their behavior. You might say you want growth, but avoid discomfort. You might say you value honesty, but avoid situations where you'd have to be completely honest. And the more you ignore that contradiction, the more it shapes your life. Because what you don't understand doesn't disappear. It continues to operate in the background, quietly influencing your choices. And over time, it creates a strange feeling, like you're not fully in control of your own direction. Not because you're incapable, but because part of you is making decisions you haven't fully seen yet. This doesn't usually show up in obvious ways. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic moment where everything falls apart. It shows up quietly, in patterns. Like when you keep returning to the same situations, even when you know they don't work. Or when you delay things that matter even though you know they're important. Or when you hold on to something that hurts you longer than you need to. From a purely logical perspective, none of this makes sense. But Dostoevsky saw something deeper. He believed that people don't just move toward happiness. Sometimes they move toward what feels familiar, even if it's painful, because familiarity gives you a sense of control, even if that control comes from something negative. If you've built part of your identity around struggle, around being misunderstood, around being overlooked, letting go of that pattern can feel like losing part of yourself. So instead, you repeat it, not because you want to suffer, but because, in a strange way, it gives you something you haven't learned how to replace. And this is why change is difficult. Not because people don't want better lives, but because they're still connected to patterns that feel known. Until you recognize that, you don't actually move forward, you just move in circles. I once knew a guy who was convinced that his biggest problem in life was simple. He thought he was just lazy. He had goals, clear ones. He wanted to get in shape, build something of his own, focus on his work, and actually move his life forward. And every morning he would wake up with that same intention, telling himself that today would be different. But by the end of the day, it almost always looked the same. He would get distracted, put things off, tell himself he'd start later, and eventually, without really deciding to, the day would just slip away. And at night, the same pattern repeated. He would sit there thinking about everything he didn't do, feeling frustrated, a little disappointed, sometimes even ashamed. And the conclusion always felt obvious. I need more discipline. I need to try harder. I need to stop being lazy. So the next day, he pushed himself again. And for a while it worked. He would force himself into action, follow routines, stay productive for a few days, sometimes even a few weeks. But then, without warning, something would break. The motivation would disappear, the structure would fall apart, and he would find himself back in the same place again. Same distractions, same quiet sense of failure. And this went on for years. Not because he didn't care, but because no matter how much effort he put in, something in him kept pulling him back. Then one day, something small shifted. Not a breakthrough, not a sudden realization, just a different kind of question. Instead of asking, "Why am I so lazy?" he asked something else. What am I actually avoiding? At first, there wasn't a clear answer, but the question stayed. And slowly he started noticing something he had never paid attention to before. Every time he sat down to do the work that actually mattered, he felt something underneath it. Not boredom, not lack of discipline. Something heavier, a quiet pressure. A sense that if he really tried, if he really focused, it would say something about who he was. Whether he was good enough, whether he was capable, whether he would fail. And without realizing it, he had built a pattern around that feeling. He avoided it, not consciously, not on purpose, but through distraction, through delay, through telling himself he'd do it later. Because as long as he didn't fully try, he never had to fully face the possibility of failing. And as long as he stayed in that space, he could keep believing that his potential was still intact. That's when something started to make sense. It wasn't that he lacked discipline. It was that part of him was protecting something. Protecting his identity. Protecting him from disappointment. Protecting him from seeing himself clearly. And once he saw that, even a little, something began to change. Not instantly. Not perfectly. But the pattern started to loosen. Because now, when he caught himself avoiding something, it didn't feel like laziness anymore. It felt like a signal, a sign that something underneath it mattered. And instead of fighting himself the way he always had, he started paying attention. And from that point on, the change didn't come from forcing more discipline. It came from understanding what he had been running from all along. So maybe it was never about laziness in the first place. Maybe there's something deeper going on. Because the parts of yourself you don't want to see don't disappear. They don't go away. They just stay out of your awareness. And from there, they influence everything. Your reactions, your decisions, your relationships. Because if you only identify with the version of yourself you're comfortable with, you lose awareness of everything else. And what you're not aware of, you can't understand. So it shows up indirectly, as frustration, as emotional reactions that feel stronger than they should. You might think someone else is the problem, but often, they're just triggering something in you that you haven't fully looked at. Dostoevsky's insight was simple but difficult to accept. You don't become whole by ignoring parts of yourself. You become whole by becoming aware of them. Not to act on them, not to justify them, but to see them clearly. Because once you see them, they lose some of their power. And for the first time, you're not just reacting, you're choosing. So what do you do with all of this? Do you try to fix everything? Do you try to eliminate the parts of yourself you don't like? Not necessarily. Because this isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware. The next time you have a reaction, pause for a moment. Not to judge it, not to suppress it, just to notice it. Notice how quickly it shows up. Notice how automatic it feels. And instead of immediately explaining it, just observe it. Ask yourself something simple. Where is this coming from? Not as a test, not as a problem to solve, just as a way to see more clearly. Because the moment you see something clearly, your relationship to it changes. You're no longer completely inside it. There's a small distance now, a small awareness. And in that space, you begin to realize something important. You are not just your thoughts. You are not just your impulses. You are not just your patterns. You are also the one who can see them. And that changes everything. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. Because the more you see, the less automatic you become. And the less automatic you become, the more your life starts to feel like something you're actually choosing. Dostoevsky didn't believe human beings were simple. He believed they were deeply complex, capable of contradiction, self-deception, and acting against their own best interests. But he also believed something else, that awareness changes everything, not by making you perfect, but by making you honest. And honesty is where real change begins. So the question isn't, am I good or bad? The real question is, what am I not seeing about myself? Because whatever that is already shaping your life. And the moment you begin to see it, even slightly, you're no longer completely controlled by it. You have a choice, maybe not a perfect one, but a real one. This has been What We Are, a space for looking a little deeper into the parts of ourselves we usually avoid. If this made you pause even for a moment, share it with someone who's trying to understand themselves better. And if you keep coming back to these conversations, take a second to subscribe, not just to follow the channel, but to stay connected to a space where we don't just look outward, but inward. Thank you for being here, and until next time, pay attention to what you avoid seeing, because that might be the part that's been shaping you all along.